IVM.
BQ Big Decisions, the BloombergQuint podcast that helps you make the right financial choices. The festive season is here, and if the lights this time around may be a little dimmer than they have been in the past years, you may be sure that there are still deals by the dozen when you step out into the market, particularly if you're going to buy a car. You've heard by now of the slowdown in sales that most car companies are contending with. Maybe you read about it on BloombergQuint.com, but that's not what I want to talk about today. Buying a car is still and will likely always be an important milestone and a big decision. You know, I've heard it said in the recent past that millennials these days are not too kicked about buying a car. And even if that is the case, I'm sure that's not true for all millennials. So, having said that, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about what buying a car means for your finances, how you should plan for it, what are the hidden costs that most people don't consider, and what is the smartest way to buy a car. Thanks for listening in. This is BQ Big Decisions, and I'm Alex Matthew. My guest today is Kartik Jhaveri, financial expert and director of wealth management at Transcend Consulting. Thanks so much for joining me, Kartik.
My pleasure.
Now, it is an aspirational purchase. Growing up, and I must say that I belong to a very unique generation. I grew up in the 90s, and that's when the Maruti 800 became very popular. I remember people waited 3 years in some cases to get their first car. It's not changed very much in that it's still a major aspirational purchase.
Absolutely, Alex. What happens is whenever people have more money, the first thing that they want to buy is a house and a car, and maybe they want to get married and things like that. But if you had to put a priority in terms of a ranking, then the number one on most people's list is a car. Phone is a necessity, so we don't really consider that as a choice. But a car is number one, and then the next thing is house, and then the third thing is all the other pleasantries that you might want to have. So yes, I mean, car is a very, very big purchase, aspirational purchase. It's a status symbol. People want to have it. Even young people, if they had the option of buying an Audi, they want to do it. And maybe, you know, the people who don't buy it are the ones who are thinking, let me accumulate the money and in the meanwhile use Uber.
Yeah, and that's actually quite an interesting point, and I didn't want to delve too much into it, but perhaps the situation that we are in right now and all the conversations going around about the slowing economy, perhaps that's changed the tone of the conversation, and if things turn around quickly, maybe that tone of conversation will change as well.
Oh, 110%. You know, what's happening is that people somewhere get worried. So when they hear a lot of negative news, it has a rub-off effect on your own financial circumstances. So you might feel, is my company stable? Will I continue to have a job? And the visibility becomes a little poor, and the confidence to go and spend future earnings become a little bit of a sticky issue. So one wants to play it safe. So if there is bad news everywhere, and if the whole world is saying it's going to rain, then, you know, I'd rather keep my umbrella ready. And that's the way people sort of react and people behave. But I don't think it's gone away anyway.
That's a very nice way of putting it. And you mentioned phone is an absolute necessity, but I see that people go out and spend a large amount of money. In some cases, maybe, you know, 1/10 of the cost of a new car. And that's so that really puts paid to the argument of affordability of a car.
Because people would essentially look at the EMI factor.
Yes.
And you know, to conjure up about a lakh or 2 or 3 to use as a down payment is not a very big issue, even if you're earning a decent amount of money.
For a lot of people,
and you open your SMS and you'll have some offers of, you know, 2 lakh, 3 lakh loans here and there. And you take that EMI is affordable. Then you're only looking at the car EMI. Can I afford the EMI? The answer is yes. And these days car companies are smart. They give you 3 years and we'll buy it back at 50% and 60% the cost. So, you know, it becomes so easy.
Okay. But having said that, Kartik, and, you know, I would love for my listeners to get back to me. Guys, do let me know what you think about the prevailing scenario and what you really think about buying a car. Is it, you know, something that you have been considering? Is it something that you put on hold for now? And why have you put it on hold if you have indeed? done that. But I'd like to talk about the buying of a car. You mentioned one of the big things that people decide to do. It's not as costly as a house, obviously. So what I've actually noticed is that people don't completely take into account all of the costs involved, and they don't plan it well enough when they're buying it. Is that something that you've noticed as well?
Yes and no. The reason for that is people don't think about it or don't plan so much because there is a fundamental presumption that you can afford the car.
Yes.
So when you know that you can afford to pay 50,000 rupees, 80,000 rupees in insurance for the year, then you don't worry so much about it. So depending on the car that you want to buy, you know that these are some incidental costs along with new cars that you're going to get. So the costs are not so large and they are not so prohibitive in nature that you might really get worried about it in that sense. Like a house is probably 100 times, you can get a good car for about anywhere between 6 lakhs to 10 lakhs to 15 lakhs. But a house could be easily like one more zero or two more zeros in the whole thing.
No, especially in Mumbai here.
Especially in Mumbai and the larger cities. So I don't think car worries people too much. And they know that, after a few years, even if they want, they'll at least get 30% or 40%. It's pretty much assured that you'll get the value back.
But having said that, Kartik, and I think this is the case for a lot of people. I've had friends who just go up to the showroom and look at the, on-road price of vehicles, and they see, how much money can I pool in right now, and essentially pay the down payment, take a loan. That's the extent of it. They don't really they don't plan more than that. My question to you is, should you? It's not something that just comes up overnight. It's not like saying, I want to change my phone. It's something that is a big purchase.
It's going to serve you for so many years. And Alex, you're quite right. It's a very smart idea to plan for it.
Yes.
Not to say that you don't plan for it. For example, you could have, just the way you have a retirement fund and an education fund and, like a travel fund, you can even have a vehicle fund. There's nothing that stops you from there. And then that fund grows in value. You make profits out of that fund. Now, depending on the size of that fund, you could use the entire profit and make a down payment. Take the full purchase of the car straight away, depending on the fund value. Or you could even do some very, very clever things. Like, if you even had the entire value of the car with you, you could still use the down payment, still invest the balance of the money into a smart investment and do some magic out of it.
I actually remember something that we've discussed in the past, and I want to get back to that a little later in the conversation. So you did mention that people tend to not plan for this. They should. Is there something that they should pay attention to with regard to the affordability? How should they gauge how much money to spend on a car? Is there an ideal amount? Like, I've noticed that people sometimes buy cars that they don't need, right? They spend too much.
Okay, now that's a very, very pertinent question, Alex. Now, my thumb rule is this. Whatever you earn, 50% of that is the maximum you should allow yourself for EMIs. Not more than that.
Okay.
All right. Which means you're, of course, left with 50% for your personal expenses, assuming that's enough.
Yeah.
Now, this 50% ideally should be for your home EMI.
Okay.
However, because we're not talking about home loans and home purchase here, once your home EMI is sorted out, or if you don't want to buy a home, then you suddenly have extra budget.
Yes.
So my point is that if you're going to spend 30% of your money for your home EMI, then your budget for the car EMI is 20% of your net income.
Okay.
If you're spending 40% for your home EMI, obviously your budget is 10%. Don't go overboard because you need to save some money. So rule of thumb is 30 to 40% you use for personal expenses, 30 to 40% if you use for your EMIs, and then at least if you save 20% bare minimum, then that's a great way to go about planning, because then you will not be financially poor or financially hungry going forward in years to come. It'll be a good financial stand or a platform that you're creating for yourself.
That's an interesting way to also calculate how much you would be able to spend on a car, even if you have the money, because you can calculate the normal length for a car loan and multiply obviously by the number of months, and that's the amount of money that you can spend on a car. So I think you've actually put things in perspective very well. Having said that, I do want to talk about the bunch of costs that a lot of first-time buyers don't consider. Like I said, they walk into the showroom, they talk about the ex-showroom price and how much they have to pay with tax and all of that, and all the bells and whistles now that they give you with the cars, but they don't talk about obviously the other costs, right? There's a maintenance cost, there's an insurance cost. It adds to the bill significantly.
And it continues to add year after year. In fact, it goes up higher and higher as the car ages. So insurance, luckily, is one factor which is the highest in the first year and then keeps going down because the value of the car is also depreciating in that sense. But your maintenance bills go higher. If you want to use a car beyond 5 years, the maintenance can go even higher, and especially if it's any of these German makes or some of these more expensive cars, the 15 lakh plus varieties. So then it can get quite expensive. Tire changing becomes an important thing, and that becomes expensive. Gadgetry, computer controlled chips and things like that. All these things really add to the cost in addition to maintenance.
Is that something that you should bear in mind right at the onset? Is that something you should factor in your costs?
I think 10% of the car value, which you originally paid, that's a fair thumb rule to go in terms of maintenance. Expect that kind of a cost to start accruing
from the original value.
Of the original value. So, for example, if your car was 15 lakhs, after the 5th or the 6th year, expect to spend about 1.5 lakh thereabouts in terms of maintenance, because some year you'll need tires, some year you'll need something else, some year something else is going to fail in the car, and then these components are expensive, and you obviously want to go to either the showroom or the reputed garage to get this thing fixed, and it won't come cheap. The labor is cheap in this country, but the components are quite costly.
And particularly with regard to the decision to hold a car beyond 5 years, at that point you're not going to get very much even if you decide to sell it, because the depreciation factor is significant on a car, right?
Yeah, I would think at least 50-60%. And that also is again driven by newer models that company is promoting, the technology of that car. Sometimes the technology becomes obsolete, and which is why people don't want to buy that, etc.
Fair enough. Is it a good idea, Kartik, and I know that this is not always possible, to buy a car cash down? You mentioned at the onset that if you have the ability to plan in advance, you know that you want to buy a car and you're not in a hurry, maybe put aside a certain amount of money. If it's not too expensive, maybe put the money together first.
Yeah, it's not so expensive. You can consider doing that. And like I mentioned, if you have a vehicle fund that you make, which is making enough profits for you, so over a period of time, you'll have enough money to buy it down. However, it's also a pretty good idea to use your capital for other things, because not everyone will have this facility. So you could use your capital, earn some interest out of it, and then manage paying some part of the EMIs or the full EMI, depending on how large you have as a fund to put away for the vehicle maintenance and all that. The reason I say this is because most of the car dealerships today have also got an NBFC, which lend you money to buy the car. They help you to buy the car. And the rate of interest is about 7%, 8%, 9%. It's not too expensive. And it's on a reducing balance method. So at the end of 5 years or 7 years, if you actually calculate the net that you're paying out, it may not be an awful lot. It is really, really affordable, because the company is making the money by selling the car, and then they will make money on the maintenance and the spares and accessories that you will buy. So buying a car per se is not so difficult. And therefore, even if you smartly put your money somewhere else, make profits out of that, use some part of it as EMIs, I think that's a great way to go to buy.
Speaking of the interest cost on the buying of a car, there was an introduction in the last budget when you're buying an electric car. Now, I do not know whether the infrastructure as we have right now is good enough to support that, but maybe sometime in the future it might make sense. Having said that, I remember, Kartik, about a year and a half, and you started talking about this. A year and a half back, we had a conversation on BQ Portfolio, the show on BloombergQuint, where this gentleman wanted to buy a car worth around, I think if I remember correctly, around 20 lakh rupees. And you had devised this very interesting plan, and I do not remember the details of it. You'd said that he should start an SIP, and around the time when he bought the car, he should take it on loan, and he should use the proceeds essentially to pay the EMI. How does that work?
So there's a fundamental assumption there, Alex. Assumption number one is that you can afford the EMI out of your regular earnings, right? Once you're able to do that, then you've got this little corpus that you've set aside.
Okay.
Now, it's like a tree. Now, the tree keeps growing in size over a period of time. If you keep chopping the branches as they emerge, then that's really bad.
Yes.
But if you let it grow into a full tree, then you can enjoy the fruits of it.
Yes.
So it's something very, very similar. So you let your fund grow.
Okay.
Then the fund will make profits for you, and you can either think about it as a reimbursement for the EMI that you're paying.
Okay.
And if the fund is large enough, then you can actually let the EMIs sort of go through a withdrawal facility.
Okay.
So let's say your investment is earning a 9% return.
Okay.
And the 9% is, broken down into 12 months, and every month a little bit of amount comes into your account, and that pretty much takes care of your EMI.
Okay.
So all you're doing is really funding the down payment, and you've already created a corpus for vehicle and entertainment, or call it luxury or travel or whatever you like.
Is this a systematic withdrawal plan that you're talking about when you say
something of that order? Yes, absolutely.
So just the modalities of this, I just want to understand. You start an SIP, assume that it's your purchase is about 1.5 2 years away.
Fair.
So you've spent a decent amount of time accumulating the money. Assume that it's given you a decent return. Okay.
Sure.
At that point, you have obviously the down payment that you make, and then you start using a small portion of that through a systematic withdrawal plan, where you pull out a certain amount of money. The rest of that corpus that you've generated continues to generate income.
Yes, and you can shift the corpus to a debt fund so that it's pretty safe. It doesn't fluctuate too much, and then you're earning the 7-8%. So provided that takes care of a good part of your EMI, that's great. But like I said, the assumption is here that you'll have to build a corpus. Now, whether you're doing the SIP for the car purchase a year or 2 or 3 years down the line, that's different. But once you're done with your accumulation, maybe you use that for the down payment, probably. Maybe it has performed, maybe it has not performed. But the assumption is you need to have a corpus large enough to be able to fund this for years and years together. Maybe 4 years you use one car, then you sell it off, you take another one. The procedure can continue forever.
And I think the advantage there, Kartik, is that if you do this and if you let your proceeds from your debt fund, in this case, pay your EMI, the amount of money that you would ordinarily have spent from your salary is free to make investments.
Further investments, yes.
So
absolutely.
you can make longer term investments with the proceeds that you have.
See, making an investment, like I keep saying, it's like growing a tree. Once you sow the seeds inside, the tree becomes big. Use it the way you want. You can use the fruits, you can use the leaves, you can use the branches, you can use what you want. But let the tree become a tree first.
Yes.
Don't really get timid about it in 1 year and 2 years. So investment is a slightly long-term plan, and once it's made, you enjoy. So if you look at any of the people who are wealthy and who are earning lakhs of rupees from a rental or from lakhs of rupees through investments, all that money wasn't normally created in one generation. It was intergenerational. One generation created, gave it to the second generation is really enjoying the fruits of what the first generation did. So it will happen in your generation also, provided you do the right moves.
Very quickly, just to close out this conversation, the whole concept of the Uber economy or the Ola economy, to use the Indian company, there is a strong case in terms of just the finances involved, right? If you are spending cumulatively even 400 rupees a day and you're traveling 20 days in a month, you're spending way less than you would spend buying a car. But the convenience factor also is a different conversation.
Yes. Prima facie, yes. It's very, very convenient. You can just hail the cab on the road or basically use your phone, call for a cab. The dynamic starts changing when you can afford to have a BMW or a Mercedes, and then you don't want to really use an Uber unless the Uber is also a Mercedes. You see? And then you can afford it. Your cost is higher, but then at that point of time, it's an aspiration, it's a dream that you're trying to fulfill, and it's a status and it's a lifestyle that you're trying to live. And then that's where it doesn't sort of apply any further. But from a practical standpoint on a day-to-day basis, yes, it's super convenient, super easy. And I mean, of course, it's so much more cost effective. So it's just like hailing a cab and moving around and have the comfort of a good car.
I take your point on the BMW, and I'm sure that everybody would want a fancy car. But it also is true for an 8 lakh car or a 9 lakh car. It's something that is convenient, because I've had, in fact, people come onto BQ Portfolio and talk about the fact that they get tired of the wait times. So it's simply a matter of convenience at the end of the day, I guess.
Convenience and infrastructure, Alex, very important, because everyone would start using an Uber and Ola if the infrastructure was good enough and if the car quality was continuously good. Otherwise, some point of time, like an idea, I hope this idea doesn't go away like so many other ideas, but people will shift on to something if they don't like the service that is being provided.
Yeah.
But if this service continues and keeps getting upgraded over time, then I think there's a very, very strong case that we don't need to use personal cars. Also our government policy.
Yeah.
If there's a government policy which sort of says that stop using all these cars which run on petrol and diesel, then suddenly there's going to be a dramatic shift.
Yes.
And which might happen, that electric vehicle incentive is just the beginning of that. Because as a country, we need renewable energy much more than we use in terms of our fossil fuels and these kind of energies that we use. So,
and who knows, Kartik, maybe our conversation will be very different 2 years hence. But thank you so much for joining me on this one.
My pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And to you, dear listener, I'd like to hear what you have to say about what we spoke about today, that is buying a car. What do you think about whether or not people should go out and buy cars? Whether affordability is a factor, or is it something else? Is it convenience? Do let us know on any one of our social media platforms. Meanwhile, do watch this space for a lot more in the world of personal finance. This has been BQ Big Decisions, and I'm Alex Matthew. Thanks so much for listening.
If you enjoyed Big Decisions, check out some other podcasts on the IVM Podcast Network. You can check out Paisa Vaisa, hosted by Anupam Gupta, Advertising is Dead, hosted by Varun Dugirala, the Ronnie Screwwala podcast, hosted by Ronnie Screwwala, or Cyrus Says, hosted by Cyrus Procha. These shows are available on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.
Janice, what do you think couples did before TV was invented?
I don't know, go for walks on the beach, long drives, fancy dinners, have more sex maybe?
But what did we do when we decided to move in together? We debated between the Chromecast and the Fire Stick.
We gave up on sleeping early so we could stay up watching true crime shows.
We got ourselves 3 cat babies.
And basically became the cutest couch potatoes around.
Okay then.
In case you guys still haven't got it, we are a TV crazy, Netflix loving, binge watching Mr. and Mrs.
I'm Anirudh Guha.
I'm Janice Sequeira.
And if like us you snort TV for breakfast, lunch and dinner, this is the podcast for you.
Tune in every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever it is that you get your podcast from. This is
Mr.
and Mrs.
Binge Watch.